Hey guys, what's up? Thanks for clicking on the video. This one is going to be a little bit different than my usual stuff. Usually for most of my videos, I write a script down that has talking points and I kind of cover over them and I don't really go on any tangents or anything. I'm very strict to what I write. But this video today, in case you're wondering, we're going to be talking about the Sony a7R Mark II. This is a camera that really started my whole journey into photography and video and professional work and making money off photography, right? So I don't want to follow a script. I just want to talk about thoughts on this camera and kind of how I feel about it. Everything good and bad. If you are curious about specs, I'll probably have a link in the description, but I'm not interested in talking about all that. You can just look that up. It's super easy. So let's get right into it. Okay, so the Sony a7R Mark II, it's pretty beat up. I've had it for about 2.5, just under 3 years. This camera has been amazing. It's been the best thing ever. So I bought this camera off someone secondhand for, I don't know, I think $1,000 2 years ago or something like that. I don't even remember how much I bought it for, and a bunch of batteries. Before this, I had an a7 II, which is okay, but I wanted something that just really had the punch, and the R series is what I wanted. I wanted that higher megapixel count. I had just started shooting a lot of weddings and graduation shoots, and I needed something that in the event that I was too far from something, I could zoom in and still keep that amazing quality. For what I think it's like 42 megapixels, this thing can punch in. It was crazy, especially for when it released in like 2015. It was the bomb.com. Improvements over the first a7 were, in-body stabilization. It had a 5-axis. It has 5-axis stabilization, which lets you go on lower shutter speeds. And autofocus is great. And in general, it is a good camera. Now, in terms of why I decided to just stick with the a7R II for so many years was, while yes, the a7 III was like Sony's first perfect camera, with the 4B being even better for hybrid. If you were just focused on photo, this was what you wanted. It was cheap, but it also did the job great, and it had all the bells and whistles you needed. I ran this probably over 100 weddings, 40 graduation shoots, another 40 personal photo shoot projects. God knows how many photos I took on this camera, and it never failed me once, which is crazy because in terms of like the minimalism, it only has one SD card slot. The batteries run out super quick. This is a 7-year-old camera at this point, so it's sometimes I was worried that it was not going to be the most reliable. And there were situations where, if let's say it was too cold towards the end of it, the end of having this camera, if it was too cold, the shutter would freeze up, or the batteries would die quick, especially if there were third-party batteries that I've used for years. There's so much of this camera that almost failed me, but it kept up really well. And if there's one camera I can recommend to you as a beginner shooter, someone who has maybe dabbled in photography, because I didn't always have this camera. I started with an a6000, what I think is the best beginner camera. But then this was my next kind of big upgrade. I didn't have the Sony a7 II for that long. I switched to the R really quick. So if you have the budget for it, I think these used go for about $700, $800 on the used market. Pick one up, man. It will make you money, in my opinion. Right now, you have to be able to use it correctly. This is the camera that if you feel confident in your work, this will do the work for you, right? This will clean up all the edges and scrapes and make your work perfect, but it won't make you a better photographer. That's one thing I kind of keep in mind. It's not like I talked about in another video, the Fuji X100V, where if you just stick it on auto, it does a lot of the work. No, this is like you have to put in the work, but there's so much more that you can get out of this. In terms of quality, yeah, it's just 14 stops of dynamic range. It's the same as this new APS-C X100V, but full frame just gives it a look, right? And it's incredible. I've shot dance competitions. I've shot, like I mentioned, weddings, so fast stuff, slow stuff, far, close. This camera kept up. And even though the 42 megapixel files are huge, I could still throw, 1,000 plus on an SD card without any issues. Now, okay, we've talked about kind of the positive stuff, how it's a great little camera, it has all the bells and whistles. Real quick, let's go about the negatives, because if you're buying this camera, you should know what is and isn't useful. First of all is the battery life. The battery life is really short. The newer cameras that run the new Z100 batteries on Sony are way better. Like they'll last me like all day, versus this will last me about a third of the way as those other batteries. Granted, a lot of my batteries now are like 2-3 years old, and they're third-party batteries, so they're not built to the best quality. So at the moment I think I have like 10 batteries that I always carry with me for professional shoots. So just kind of keep that in mind. Is battery's not the best, but if you're starting off, you know, I don't think you need that high of a battery life. I think it's okay to have batteries that don't last as long, because you won't be shooting 10-12 hours a day like I was towards the end of this camera's lifespan. So, by the way, this camera isn't dead. I'm gonna sell it on eBay. It's still perfect. I just mentioned lifespan because I'm about to get rid of it. Next thing would be just small stuff that design-wise I was kind of sad with. As you see, there's no eye cup on the camera, and that's because I kept losing it. I bought like 4 or 5. I don't know what it was. I think I would just beat it down so much. And granted, this camera has seen things. It has been through its paces. It's pretty roughed up. So I get it. But on my newer A7 IV that I'm recording this video with, the eye cup doesn't really seem to move at all. So just kind of keep that in mind. In terms of like customization, it's great. I think the exposure dial is not really useful at this point. I never use my exposure dial. It's more for something for auto settings, which I never had this camera on. On the A7 IV, instead of having the exposure dial, they just have a custom dial, which I think is great. So that would have been nice to have on this, but that's okay. Another thing is no flip out screen. I know we keep talking about flip out screens, but it is important. But it's okay, you know, if you want to mount it on a tripod and have it, you know, under or over, it's an okay option. You can't take selfies with it or anything like that. No vlogging, it's not really for that. And when I would record video on this camera, I would have to just mount an external monitor. So just kind of keep that in mind. But I mean, it has the ports you need for video. The door is a little like flimsy. You know, it's not like the newer cameras where it stays firm in place. So I'm always worried that this might break, but I don't open the ports too much. So I'm not too worried about that. And it can get a little heavy at some times. I always have it on spider holster or on a camera strap minimum. I never just have this camera holding all the time. But I've gotten so used to it that it doesn't really bother me if I have to hold it for long periods of time. You know, this camera, if I do need to put it down, it can get beat up pretty quick. You know, even though I mounted an L cage and all that stuff, and I put a skin on it to stop it from scratching, it still got pretty beat up. You know, over 100 plus weddings and another 100 different shoots, you know, it is gonna get busted up. So, but hey, you know, camera equipment is made for you to use it, right? Just kind of keep that in mind. You know, it's not made to be babied, right? And this made me, you know, probably 10, 20, 30 times the amount of money that I paid for it, right? So this was a worthwhile investment, and I can recommend it. You know, I love that it has NFC and remote shooting, because sometimes if I need to take a self-portrait, I can just use my phone. You know, like there's so much this camera can do, you know, quick shooting and the video. While I talked about it in my last video that the video quality on this isn't the best, it's still manageable. And if you are really good at color grading, or you want to learn how to become a colorist, try coloring some S-Log2 footage on this. You know, it kind of teach you a lot of things that it taught me. All the dials are pretty good. I never really changed the mode dial or the exposure, but everything else is clean. It's super useful. It's a good size. It feels comfortable to hold. I don't have much gripes about this camera, even though I have mentioned a lot of small negatives about it. It's never failed me. It's never died on me. It's never ruined an SD card. It's always kept up. And I hope that with my new A7 IV, it will live up to the pomp and circumstance of the Sony a7R Mark II. And if you really are looking to start doing professional work, I mean, this is what got me into professional work, then get an A7R Mark II. Even an A7 II will be fine. But I just think that for a backup, you'll get more photos that you can use out of an A7R Mark II. Just because, yeah, you're not gonna print large posters as much, especially if you're just starting off, which is what they recommend this camera for, you know, for larger prints. But it's more of a backup if, you know, you shot it at the wrong way and you need to zoom into something, you have the megapixels to do so. On top of that, I recommend that if you want the best quality, get good glass. You know, I started on the Sony 50mm 1.8, and then I moved down to the Sigma 1.4. This Sigma lens, if you can see it as well, it's pretty beat up. But this is the lens to get, in my opinion, in terms of like the price to performance ratio and all that stuff, this is an incredible lens. There are better 50mm versions, and there's other options for photo, you know, 35 and whatever, but this lens rocks. And as they say, date your cameras, but marry your lenses. This lens, I can still use it for my Sony a7 IV, as well as my other Sigma 35, which is what I'm using to record this video. I can't recommend this camera enough. I'm sad to let it go, but I'm not going to use it now that I have my 4. It's just better in every way. But I am going to miss it, because this is what got me started on the journey and really cemented me into the person I am today. And I can't thank this camera enough. I'm happy I bought it, and overall I hope that this goes to an owner that will love it and appreciate it and take care of it. So that's going to be it for the video. I'm going to keep it short. I'm not going to do anything crazy. If you're interested in this camera, check out Reddit. that's probably what I'll post it on Photo Market. Yeah, I have nothing else to say about that camera other than it rocks. Again, spec list will probably be in the description, or just look it up. You know, we're not talking about all the specifics. Like, most modern cameras nowadays can keep up. You know, you don't need some crazy like 15 frames a second or, you know, 100 megapixels. Like, no, just most cameras will do. We're talking about, in effect, how do they actually work when you put them to the test. This camera can keep up. I would recommend it to most professionals, really. You know, I've shot weddings that they spend $100,000, $300,000, $3 million on the wedding, and this can take photos that will keep up. So have a good rest of your day. Any questions about this camera, feel free to do so. I didn't shoot too much video on it. I thought the video kind of lacked in quality, and it wasn't that easy to color grade, but I know everything about this camera for photo. So feel free to ask me any questions. I'm gonna keep it short. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one, all right? Peace.